Climate Change Commission.
Bezos Earth Fund, who is representing the Global Alliance for People and Planet, and I think a whole set of people in the audience who've been, oh, sorry, MF, I'm about to leave you out. Sorry about that. And Marie-Françoise Marie-Nelly, who is the World Bank Director for South Africa and a whole set of SADC countries. I'm not going to name them, MF, in case I get them wrong or leave one out, who is joining us online. And as I said, there are a whole host of people in the audience who have experience and have been involved in this process along the way. And at some point, I think we should come back to the audience. I'd like to, before we start, also recognize Mr. Mpho Makwana, the chairman of the Eskom board, who is with us today. And she's gone now, but I saw Mandy Rambros in the audience, who is no longer with Eskom, but I think who has been involved in this process from the beginning. So I hope that she is maybe going to come back and join the audience. The way this is going to be structured is that I'm going to hand over to Andre now to take us through a short presentation. And after that, we will run a panel discussion around Komati. So Andre, over to you.
Right. Thank you very much. If I can just do a sound check and see if it's okay. Right. So the Komati project is a really exciting project for Eskom. It's a project that gave us an alternative to shutting down a town and a plant that had served Eskom and South Africa since 1961. And we had this opportunity to transition smoothly into a new and a better alternative, we believe, that allows us to embrace a greener and cleaner future. Now, trying to move to a just energy transition is immensely challenging, and it's not going to be an easy ride. And we really need support from all stakeholders in order to make this possible. Currently, we're a heavily coal-dependent economy. We, as Eskom, are a major contributor to carbon emissions. But very importantly, as the global trading environment changes, some 46% of South Africa's exports are susceptible to carbon border export taxes. And this is a huge risk for the competitiveness of South Africa's economy. And then, very, very interestingly, and this is something that very few people actually talk about, is the water intensity of coal-fired generation. We use about 260 billion liters of water every year. If you look at the 22 gigawatts of coal-fired capacity that we intend to retire by 2035, that will release 40 billion liters of water every year, which is enough water to supply 220 liters of water per day to 200 million people, 3 times the South African population. So you can imagine what that does to water security, what that does to agricultural opportunities through irrigation and so forth. So this is, I think, a major part of the just energy transition that is being underestimated. And I would like to ask people to do more work on water and what water does for growth opportunities and employment opportunities. Then we have a plant that was built at a time when emission standards were significantly more relaxed. And this means that we have to invest extraordinary amounts of money, 300 billion rand, or about $22 billion, in making sure that we can comply. And this creates no new capacity. And in fact, it will require us to use 16 billion liters of water additionally every year. So this is an alternative solution that we're putting forward, this just energy transition. to also address our energy shortfall. You may know, those of you in the audience who are from South Africa, who will be familiar with the sad phenomenon of load shedding, which has been with us now since 2008. So we urgently need more generation capacity to be added to the grid. What is the quickest, what is the cheapest, and what is the easiest to deploy? It is the rollout of cleaner, greener technologies at scale. Then lastly, and this is something to bear in mind when we talk about the legitimate concerns of those who are invested in the coal value chain. We currently have very high unemployment, and in particular, the gender inclusion rates in the economy in Mpumalanga, which is the heart of the coal belt, are significantly lower than the national average. So both from an employment perspective as well as from a gender equity perspective, we have significant socioeconomic challenges today prevailing with our dependence on coal. And I think these issues need to be debated and understood when it comes to comparing the status quo to the future opportunity that exists. So we have a huge concentration of coal-fired power plants in Mpumalanga. This is a map of the eastern part of South Africa. And you can see there the plants that we need to repurpose and repower by 2035. So that's the 22 gigawatts that we talk about. This is an immense challenge. Now, some people may say, but why don't you just keep on running these plants? The fact of the matter is that any piece of mechanical equipment has a finite life. You don't see too many 50-year-old cars driving around on the road, and there's a reason for that. They reach the end of their useful economic life, and then they need to be replaced. So we are reaching the end of the road for these coal-fired power stations, but now we need to start planning to replace them so that we don't exacerbate the energy capacity shortfall. So this is the opportunity. You can look at it as a problem statement. I choose to look at it as an opportunity statement. And if we can repower these plants, if we can repurpose them and unlock the existing transmission and distribution capacity to ensure a just transition, this will be a very exciting outcome. Now, to ensure that this happens, you need to have three resources. You need to have, first of all, solar radiation. And for a long time, there was the notion that the sun didn't shine in Mpumalanga. And we've now comprehensively rebutted this. The solar resource in Mpumalanga is way better than the best solar resource in Germany, for example. So we are blessed in South Africa with some significant solar resources, also wind resources. Once you go up to a hub height of about 150 meters, you get access to these really great wind resources. But then also we have existing infrastructure. We have a grid, because the grid currently connects all of those power plants that I showed you in the previous slide to the market, predominantly still in the area around Johannesburg, in Gauteng. And what that means is that we have existing infrastructure that we can tap into through smart investments in transformer capacity. And this is, again, another asset that we've got that's already been paid for. So we don't need to build huge new transmission lines. We do need to build transmission lines to the Northern Cape to unlock the resources there. But from Mpumalanga to push for this just energy transition, we have the grid. But then, extremely importantly, we've got people. We've got lots of trained people living in Mpumalanga, and there are about 200,000 of these individuals that can be upskilled, reskilled. And for this purpose, when we looked at Komati in particular, it was crucial to us to invest in people. And through an alliance with the Cape Peninsula University of Technology and their South African Renewable Energy Training Center, we were able to leverage off their curricula and their accredited qualifications to start a training center at Komati to train solar and PV technicians. Today, already, I'm told that there are 16,000 vacancies in wind and solar industries in South Africa that cannot be filled because we don't have enough trained people. So the demand from the market is clearly there. And if we train more people, reskill them, then that's a real opportunity. I'm also very happy to announce that we are going to be replicating this training center at our Grootvlei power station, where we've also now secured funding to the tune of 10 million euros from KfW, the German Development Bank. So that's another positive step towards investing in people, because we need to make this transition a just one. So Mpumalanga has what it takes to enable and support a just energy transition. Sorry, this button is extremely sensitive. So we are unlocking land. We own significant land around our power stations with grid access. This is largely despoiled land. So it's land that's been used for open cast mining, rehabilitated, so we can use it without impacting on food security, for example. And we think that there's about 7 gigawatts of potential available that we can unlock. In our first round, where we released the first tranche to bids, this was oversubscribed by 3 times, which shows the enormous appetite of the private sector to come in and invest in clean, renewable energy capacity. We then further will make strategic investments in the grid in order to unlock further capacity. That will add another 27 gigawatts of capacity. We will continue with repowering and repurposing, like we are piloting now at Komati, with the kind support of the World Bank. And then lastly, we will further enable private sector investors to use their balance sheets to act as the security for power purchase agreements to enable limited recourse project finance to be deployed to support the construction of large renewable energy facilities. And that coupled with some very good innovation that we're seeing in terms of market aggregators, demand aggregators, who can then work with small users of electricity and aggregate demand and sign large-scale power purchase agreements. That is a very interesting and promising development going forward. So we've made a short video, which is quite interesting and explains in much better detail than I can what Komati is about.
The opening of the Komati Power Station in 1966 was a momentous event for South Africa. The country was embarking on an exciting journey of growth and development, and the Komati Power Station was a symbol of that progress. The planning of Komati Power Station started in the 1950s, and the first unit was commissioned on 6 November 1961. In 1990, the station was put into cold storage due to surplus capacity on the network and increasing maintenance costs of the aging plant. In 2003, it became evident that South Africa faced an electricity shortage, and Komati was returned to service, running from 2012 to 2022. It has now reached the end of its technical life expectancy, making it uneconomical to continue operating the station. The last unit at the station was shut down on 31 October 2022, ending an era. And with all endings comes new beginnings. Instead of just shutting down the station, Eskom will now repower Komati as a renewable energy site. Phase 1 will be conducted in parallel with decommissioning and includes 150 megawatts of photovoltaic power and 70 megawatts of wind power, 150 megawatts of battery power, and 3 100 megavolt amperes of reactive power in the form of synchronous condensers. The rebirth of Komati comes with new opportunities for the surrounding communities as well. Eskom will build a 500 kilowatt agrivoltaic PV plant, and microgrids will be built to power communities across South Africa. The Komati Training Facility will upskill employees and community members in the construction, operation, and manufacturing of renewable energy components. By 2030, the project is estimated to have had a significant social impact. The repowering and repurposing of Komati Power Station is a truly historic event that will change the face of energy production in South Africa. We would like to acknowledge our partners who have made it possible. The World Bank Group for a concessional loan facility to repower and repurpose Komati. The Global Energy Alliance for People and Planet for funding the Komati Training Facility. Ceratec for renewable energy training. Eskom, changing the face of electricity generation.
Thank you very much, Andre. Can I ask if the panelists could come and sit at the front? Wherever you wish. Okay, sit there, I'll sit here. Okay, let me actually close this. Thank you. Thanks very much, Andre. I mean, I think that that gives a very clear sense of the overall intention of the repurposing and repowering. I think it is certainly a path-breaking project, and I want to start off by asking, firstly, MF to come in, and then Leon, as two of the international partners around Komati, and maybe MF to ask what made the World Bank decide to support this, and what the experience has been of the kind of journey that you've walked over the last period in working with Eskom on this project.
Yes, thank you very much, Joanne. And let me acknowledge two of my colleagues that are also there, that are actually in charge of the preparation and implementation of the project. Julie Fraser, who is our energy manager, based here in South Africa with me, and Bandita Sijapati, who designed the just component of the project, which is really an important one. So I just wanted to acknowledge that. So coming to your question, let me start maybe by making a couple of points, reinforcing a couple of points that Andre made, which in fact justified our engagement. The first is really, as indicated, the fact that South Africa is a very high carbon intensive economy. He has indicated that 41% of the greenhouse gas emissions are coming from the electricity sector. So in engaging, in decommissioning, repurposing, it is addressing a very important global agenda in terms of the mitigation. But I think that what is more important is South Africa itself, and the fact that we saw a clear line designed by the South African government and Eskom in defining this just energy transition, and also designing an investment plan covering electricity, electric vehicle, and green hydrogen was very important. And I think that being myself, at COP last week, I could testify how South Africa positioned itself as a champion of the South to support, the global agenda. Looking now a little bit more at the impact, I think that and it was mentioned in the presentation, the cost of load shedding. For an economic point of view, we felt that it is very important to support South Africa in doing that, because our estimate is that with the load shedding, South Africa is losing about $200 million per day. So that is $2 billion a year. And if you go, on a 10-year period, it's quite significant. Sorry, 2 billion per month and 24 billion per year. So it's quite significant, particularly compared with the need that have been established in the investment plan that would be in the order of $17 billion. So we saw that it was very important. It was an efficient way and least cost way of doing the repurposing of the energy in South Africa, allowing the country having new energy, renewable energy of qualities that will allow South African export to continue to compete in global markets. And more importantly, this is the first experience of the World Bank, and we felt that it was important for us to join and support the client in that endeavor, because it can be replicated not only in South Africa as you implement the larger just energy transition strategy, but also for other countries in the world, such as Indonesia, Vietnam, even India and China. And I could see last week when I was in COP, a very important interest from other clients, other countries to come and see what South Africa is doing. Now, how did we do it? And what are the lessons today? I think that the point that Andre made, which is, it is a learning experience, and we will have to adjust as we go. So to me, the first element was a strong ownership by the government and by the Eskom team. It was very clear that they were in the driving seat, and we were coming to support and offer the experience that we had in some aspects, perhaps where Eskom is definitely not its main role, which is a just part, although it's very encouraging to see how Andre has presented how it is articulated. But obviously, this is where Eskom needed some support. So we brought our best teams looking at how this just transition, how do you reorganize people, how do you create new opportunities for not only the employees, but the communities around Mpumalanga. So I think that that was a very important element. And as a result of that, this component, which we call component C in the project, represents 10% of the total allocation. So it's a significant amount on that. I think that the second one was, of course, looking at the global public good nature of the decommissioning, because we could say you just close the plant and that's it. But I think that Eskom going beyond in terms of rehabilitating the sites and doing the needful to reuse the facility, including what was indicated in terms of the training centers, but making sure that in terms of the environmental, the soil was going to be properly treated and so forth. So I think that that was very important. And so the third one, this renewable component, which is quite interesting, and it was actually a lot of debate to decide whether the World Bank should finance this renewable component, given the fact that South Africa already has an experience of having private sector being involved in renewable. But I think that jointly it was agreed that it was important to have this component as part of the project. First of all, because having a demonstration effect and being able to bring the staff of Eskom up to speed with these new technologies. So the upskilling would be very important. Secondly, as I understand, I am not an engineer, but I understand that this capacity help also stabilize the grid. I had a conversation with the chairman of Eskom, who was indicated that if, for example, Limpopo had batteries, it could have helped reduce significantly the load shedding. So I think that a combination of that was very, very important. And lastly, I think that this component 3 that look at options for the employees, that look at options for the communities around the plant in terms of diversification in agriculture. And I think that this agrivoltaic project is very interesting. I was able to see it. And as I understand, they would like to empower the communities to run such projects. So I think that this was very important. And also looking at the platform to bring the stakeholders. What we have heard in this process, I had the opportunity to attend with the PCC a series of consultations, one of them early August in Mpumalanga. And really, I realized how important it is to have labor unions, the communities, and the provincial government, because ultimately, in terms of reshaping the province economy, it's much beyond the scope of what Eskom can do. So these are a number of critical points that I wanted to put. I think that what is important in summary is the learning by doing, the flexibility, and I think that wisely Eskom perhaps choose one of the case that is simpler, because we have to say that given the fact that only one turbine was operating, in terms of the impact on the coal mines, it's rather limited for this particular plant. In terms of the employees, it's also rather limited, but at the same time, it offers the opportunity to look at what are the options that need to be considered as Eskom is now planning to scale up and continue the decommissioning with the next key plants that are online, as I understand. So thank you very much for asking me to contribute, and happy to respond. But I would say one, really the positioning of South Africa as a champion of the South in terms of this decommissioning, repurposing, this energy transition. Secondly, the imperative for South Africa to do it beyond the global impact, because the efficiency gains are so obvious as presented by Andre. And lastly, the possibility of learning together and thanking the partners that will speak later. You mentioned the Alliance, but I also would like to mention the UK government, who has contributed to the grant component of this program. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, MF, for I think that's a very comprehensive explanation of not only the World Bank's role in this, but how I think how South Africa is seen internationally and how that has supported this process. Leon, if I can come on to you. GEAP has funded the training center at Komati. And I think that is obviously a critical part of being able to ensure a future for the people in the area in terms of new skills, new opportunities, both for young people as well as for existing workers. But I think there is maybe a bigger question around Sorotec, which is really in an endeavor like this. I think that what MF's explanation has made clear is you've got to mobilize a very wide set of stakeholders and partners. So maybe to talk a little bit broadly about the role of philanthropy, and then to maybe come back to the Sorotec and the training center experience.
That sounds great. And thank you for warning me ahead of time of what you would be asking me several moments ago. So, well, first off, I just wanted to say thanks for the opportunity to be here at the Bezos Earth Fund. It's great to be involved through GEAP in this. And congratulations on all the progress on the Komati power plant. South Africans was a model for the JETPs. South Africa's paving the way for many more. Thank you. So let me say just briefly, quickly about the Bezos Earth Fund and GEAP, and then get to the question. So the Bezos Earth Fund, for those who don't know, is a relatively new philanthropy. Jeff Bezos committed $10 billion to be spent over 10 years, not in perpetuity, but by 2030, on climate and nature as two main pillars, but with equity and justice as a cross-cutting lens. And I think that's going to be critical for how we think about Komati in this context. One of the major ways that we've engaged in trying to make progress is through our funding as an anchor partner, along with Rockefeller Foundation and IKEA Foundation for the Global Energy Alliance for People and Planet. And that's how we've been involved in the Komati power plant. And I want to just put on the table two parts of that. It's global energy, well, actually three, energy, alliance for people. Those three words, I think, really critical in the context of what we're talking about here, the context of the energy transition. We all know that we need to be moving out of fossil fuels and replacing them with other energy sources, building new supply chains and so forth. And coal is a core part of that. And coal presents tremendous challenges because of the existing infrastructure. But in doing so, we need to be thinking about doing this in a way that's really for the people. And that's really, in fact, where most of the challenges come up. So I'll come back to that in just a moment. But I think it's important to think about how philanthropy engages in this space. So I think people have been seeing numbers bandied about over the last 2 weeks here, but before, about how much investment is required to keep the world on track, make sure the world's on track to something like 1.5 degrees. And the number comes in around, somewhere around $1 trillion a year, $1 trillion a year annually. So that's, give or take a certain amount, but that's roughly the magnitude. So let's just say it's around $1 trillion. Philanthropic spending is maybe something on the order of 5 billion. So philanthropic funding is not going to be able to underwrite this process. It needs to be used very strategically and surgically to make advances. And that includes enabling conditions. It includes capacity building, regulations, laws, technical assistance, but it also includes piloting, trying new ideas, showcasing ways to do things that haven't been done before, trying to find new models, coming in and doing it the first time and trying to make that happen. And we see Komati in exactly that way. The big question for trying to move out of coal, or many questions, but one of the biggest is how to handle the employment impacts and the effects on affected communities more broadly. And Komati is trying to make a play in that. And we've invested in the training facility. That's one way to move forward on this. I think in different instances, in different countries, and different contexts, the way that we make up jobs or move forward on jobs will be different. Komati is very interesting in the sense that it's sitting in an area with so much transmission infrastructure and solar resources that, in fact, maybe there are many jobs that can be placed into that industry. That's not always true. But in this case, it's an ideal investment for us. And talking about the partner, the alliance part of it, we have a willing set of partners. South Africa actually, I'll tell you from an outside view, has a really strong character of stakeholder-led interaction through PCC and other processes. And so a willing set of partners to move, showcase a new idea or showcase this idea. And it's great to hear being copied in other places. And that's our hope. We come in, we show that we can do something, we pilot, and then we hope to see it happen again and again. And in this case, it's really about what to do with the people who are affected. And I just want to point out that often we think about what to do about the people that are affected, but it's not just about the negative side. It's about what's a positive story. Is there something actually better and an opportunity that we can take out of this, which I think was mentioned earlier. So that's where we sit.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Tuli, if I can come to you, during the process, I suppose, of building the Just Transition Framework that has been approved by Cabinet was informed by a set of community consultations across the country, and particularly in a number of coal belt communities. And I thought, looking at the kind of plan for Komati and the areas that are being addressed, to what extent do you believe, well, maybe to talk a little bit about some of the anxieties that communities raised in the context of that consultation, and maybe to talk about, having heard Andre's explanation and MF's explanation, as well as the input from Leon, to talk about to what extent do you think that a model like Komati offers us a way forward to address some of those concerns?
Thank you, Joanne. As we are talking, I was thinking about a saying I normally hear. I don't know who the author is, to say, if you want to go quickly, go alone. If you want to go far, go with others. And for me, the issue of partnerships is very key in this space. But just talking about the development of the Just Transition Framework, where we went to communities, and your question, Joanne, is what are the anxieties that people are putting on the table? People especially in the coal areas, let me call them that, have suffered from air pollution for many decades. So they are very much aware of the health impacts that this industry, presents. But they also have not benefited much. Some of them have homes where there are huge power lines and they don't have electricity themselves in their homes. And so they put forward that injustice, in their view, that this has happened to us. And, we want to change this story. The next big thing is the issue of jobs and livelihoods. It is very critical. Everybody's asking the question, but I sell food on the road where the truckers pass and they buy food from me. And that's my livelihood. That's how I take care of my family. So if there's no longer trucks, there's no longer Eskom, there's no longer anything, what am I going to do about my family? Of course, in South Africa, in different parts of the country, there are issues of service delivery, which you cannot run away from. But what I can then say is how people are looking forward to the just transition part of this work. They are seeing themselves participating in a future economy with positivity, and they are asking, what are the opportunities and how are we going to be empowered as communities to participate in this new economy that is being built in South Africa? And that is encouraging for everybody who is in the room, who hears the story, that South Africans acknowledge the problems that we've had in the past, the problems that we have now, and the shift that is taking place. And they are saying, we want to participate in this. And what are the opportunities? Come back to us and tell us how we participate in this. And for me, the issue of partnerships then becomes key, because there's not one stakeholder who has all the answers. There's not one stakeholder who can do it all. The transition is about everything. It's about energy, it's about livelihoods, it's about training, reskilling for the future, and all those investments that are needed. And partnerships become key. Training centers, in fact, we should go back even to our curriculum in primary schools and say, do we still need to train the way we used to train? What I did in grade 1 and grade 5, is it relevant in 2028? And how then do we train this generation that is coming up to be relevant for the economy that they will have, that we are transitioning from what we are now to the future that we want? And we are very grateful, I must say, to all the partners that have participated in the project, because there has really been a need for all the investments that have been made. Thank you, Joanne.
Thank you, Thuli. Maybe if I can come back to you, Andre. I think that I've been very fortunate, having participated in a number of forums over the last couple of years where there've been regular updates on progress with Komati, and having seen how this project has come together has been really, really inspiring. But at the back of my mind is that one slide that you put up that shows the numbers of power stations and the way that the IRP has set out 22 gigawatts to come off the grid, or to be closed down, the coal stations that reach end of life by 2035. So Komati is a start, and the way ahead is a long and big one. And I think the question, I suppose, for me is, what has the experience of Komati shown us that enables us to be able to get onto a path that really allows us with confidence to be able to start to move from those power stations to power stations over the next 10 years and beyond? And what do we need to bear in mind in order to be able to build on the successes of Komati and learn from the challenges?
Thanks, Joanne. Yes, it is indeed a huge challenge. The scale of what we are undertaking here should not be underestimated. 22 gigawatts is 47% of our installed capacity. To replace that, we need to build between 50 and 60 gigawatts. So it is a massive challenge, and I don't think anybody should make light of it. But it is also an opportunity for us to create jobs, to create new industries, and to protect the competitiveness of our economy going forward. So I think it is an exciting opportunity. I think also the major lesson that we should learn is that the people very often get obsessed with the present. But we find ourselves in our current energy position because in the past we spent insufficient time talking about the future. So if we don't start spending a lot more time talking about the future, planning for the future, understanding what we need to start doing now in order to engineer the outcomes that we want, in 10 years' time from now, we will look back and we will say, you know, we should have and we could have. And our competitors, and there are many competitors out there who lay claim to concessional financing, will have raised their hands and presented a better case than South Africa. So I think the one lesson that I take away from this is a sense of urgency, that we need to act and we need to implement. We should not dither, we should not dawdle. We should start. And I think Komati hopefully is but the start.
Thank you. Maybe if I can come back to you, and just building on what Andre has just said, and the fact is we are in the first stages of a long and complex journey, and maybe to ask, is the World Bank in it for the long haul? And if you are, then how do you see that unfolding? And what would it take to be able to take this Komati base and move forward from your perspective?
Yes, thank you again, Johan. When Tuli gave the nice saying that she had, let me tell you the one that I sent to my team when the project was approved by the board. I think that I use Nelson Mandela, who said, it seems always impossible until it is done. And I think that that was the case for the Komati one. So this is the point. So first of all, we are in the long haul. You met our president, you heard our managing director. First of all, there is a lot of appreciation from the World Bank senior management on what is being done in South Africa. Secondly, as Andre said, and I mentioned earlier, it is really a key pillar of the development trajectory of South Africa and our country climate and development report. I do a little commercial for the room. For those who have not read it, please do. It's only 50 pages and the executive summary is 10 pages. Shows that just with this component of the activity, South Africa can improve, the GDP in the next 10, 20 years by to 2.5%. It's not the 5% in the NDP, but it's certainly much more than one we have. The projections are about 1%. So just for that, because we think, because of the significance of South Africa in the sub-region, but on the continent, we think that it is really important. Secondly, as you know, the climate investment facility, the CIF has just allocated $500 million to South Africa to move with the next 3 plants. I think Andrina can then and grow. We, the World Bank, are ready to join forces because clearly there will be a need to leverage these resources, which first of all reduce the cost of lending, but allows, of course, to expand the resources needed. And we are certainly ready to move. In fact, our managing director, the question he asked is that when are we coming with the next tranche? But I think because of what you said, Andre, on the challenges, we need to move. In fact, I told my team that as soon as we are done, with the COP, we need to sit to look at the implementation, timeline. What is a number of things that are already being done. And thank you again to GIAP, because I think that the elements, the owners, engineers, and the third component, bringing a private operator to manage this component, all this in the way. And the sooner things are in place, the sooner that people see that something is important, of course, it will create, the motivation to continue. So we really want to move, but as Andre said, as we move, we will see the challenges and we will need to adjust. So this is why we see very importantly having a feedback loop, and we are pleased with the stakeholder platform that has been designed within the project that will bring not only, of course, the ESCOM team, but the provincial government, the national government, civil society, labor, so that it becomes, you know, an initiative that is really a common initiative. And we see that centrally as part of the development agenda, the trajectory of the government. And finally, we are going to increase our team because we think that we will need, in fact, on Monday already, I'm going to Mpumalanga with Impact Catalyst to indeed see how this third component is shaping. So we will need to be out there, not in Pretoria, you know, in Linwood, but what is happening. So we are going to strengthen our team. So yes, we want to be there. We want to already have the full demonstration of Komati project. As we have the demonstration effect of Komati moving into the next ones, where of course more complex issues of coal implication on coal miners, and of course more employees will surface, and we will need to face that. Mobilizing more resources, indeed, we are there. And finally, we think that, Andre, you will need maybe to establish a tourism office at Komati, because the number of countries that have said, we want to come and see what you are doing, I think that you may need to have a team just on that, so that you don't distract those who are actually in the decommissioning and repurposing. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. Yeah, and I think that the amount of important people who have come through Komati in the last year is quite extraordinary. Leon, you know, when I look at what is happening in Mpumalanga around the energy transition, one of the things that I see is that there are multiple agencies coming in, some of them local agencies, some of them international agencies, all running many and varied projects. And I suppose the question that I've been asking for a while is to say, what is it going to take for all of these little initiatives to somehow start working in tandem and to be able to ensure that there's no duplication, there isn't fragmentation, we aren't leaving out gaps, and that is real scale and impact that it's being built. And I think from the perspective of philanthropy, it's a very critical issue, because I think that philanthropy money coming in can either support scale and impact, or it can support these myriad of little things that don't necessarily achieve what you want. So just thinking about the broader set of organizations, philanthropy organizations, both domestic and international, that are interested in this, what do you think it's going to take to be able to get, I suppose, and can you get some kind of a coordinated approach to the challenges of the just transition in the coal belt in South Africa?
That's a great question. I've been wondering that same question myself, and I think all of us have. And I think this is not isolated to the coal belt of South Africa. I just tell a story of another country where we were looking, and the US government had asked a friend to look at what sort of modeling studies had been done there about the energy transition. And they found 17 studies for 14 different donors for 5 different ministries, all kind of looking at similar stuff. And so I think, just to make a general point, to agree with you first, and then come back to think about solutions. I think if you look in the private sector, we love to have competition. We want to have what we call creative destruction and moving forward and by competing. But in many areas like this, we actually want coordination. We really need coordination. And I think there's a tremendous amount of funds that get wasted by a lack of coordination and duplication. So we're thinking about exactly the same thing. I would say from the GAP perspective, again, I would focus on that alliance point. I think as GAP has come into fruition, and become a real entity that's making real investments and on real projects. It's now grappling with precisely that issue. And I know, for example, in other countries where GEAP is working, there's been a focus first on trying to get a pilot out, a new idea, but then to say, okay, how do we build this alliance? And so I think, I don't know the answer. I do think it's a wonderful place for philanthropy. I'll also, you mean to come in, whether it's philanthropy, but other organizations that are engaged and really run in some sense the process for those who are engaged in providing funding into those situations. So I think it's a wonderful place for philanthropy to do it. I don't think it's isolated. And the question is kind of, is it philanthropy? Does philanthropy fund a local organization to manage that, whether it's the PCC or others? Is it, how does that actually get managed? But it's clearly the sort of high leverage place that philanthropy can play to do that coordination, both amongst itself, but more broadly, it's the kind of investment that makes sense. So I'm not giving you a very good answer other than to agree with you and to say that I think it's a critical issue, not just here, but everywhere we're seeing right now with the interest in climate and moving ahead, basically moving ahead on climate. And I do think it's a place that philanthropy to act together. Not that it hasn't been, but it's just so much more action now and really pull it together. And I think GEAP actually is in a really good place to be doing that in the context of the coal belt in South Africa. Partial answer. I hope it sort of helps. Mostly agreeing.
Okay, so Thuli, you've got a just transition framework. You have a commission with commissioners from a wide range of sectors across society, including, I am very pleased that we've finally brought the faith-based communities into the commission. I think absolutely critical. What do you do with this in order to support the implementation of the just transition? So in other words, how's the commission going to contribute in the next year or two to this process?
Thank you, Joanne. So with all that has been achieved, one of the things that the president has asked the commission to do is to consult on the Just Energy Transition Investment Plan, to take it to the communities, to get people's views on it so that it can be concluded and it becomes a final country document. That is the benefit of the commission, to take the difficult conversations, bring them to the room and get a social compact agreement on what needs to be put forward. And when it comes to the Just Transition Framework, we are now embarking on a process of drafting the implementation plan. This is the framework, this is what we've agreed on, but how do we then do it? Which is also going to be consultative. Of course, there are different players in the process holding different positions, but everybody needs to participate. That's the next step that we are going to embark on, and hopefully conclude the implementation plan and hold another multi-stakeholder conference to share, because usually we consult groups of people and then we do need one big event where everybody's ideas are put forward for everyone to see what's being put forward, and then the commission to then consider all of that and adopt it and then hand it over to the president. That's the next big thing after the consultation of the JET IP, is the development of the implementation plan and getting social compact and agreement around that. Thank you.
Okay, Andre, my big question around this, and I've spent a lot of the last year working on this JET investment plan, is really how do we make this sustainable? I mean, we have, I think with the best will in the world and with great thanks to the World Bank and to GEAP and to all of the Canadian government, the CIF, all of the partners who've come in, somehow I think that we're going to have to find some, I suppose, uniquely South African and domestic answers to how we are going to ensure that in the long run, there is a sustainable financing model that underpins not only Komati, but it's Komati on steroids that you really are looking at. And I think that the earlier we start to ask that question, the easier it might be to find the answers, or at least be able to identify the challenges that we're going to need to get across in order to make that happen. And maybe also in that, to talk a little bit about what you think needs to be done in terms of getting a broad understanding and acceptance of what this decommissioning plan actually implies.
Thanks, Jan. Yeah, I think the question about making it sustainable is to create an institutional framework that is not dependent on any individual, that can survive changes in political dispensations, whatever the case may be, but it's got to be in a position to take 20-year decisions and implement 20-year decisions. Because if you don't have consistency, then you will fail. And infrastructural decisions, and by and large, this is an infrastructural decision, are decisions that are taken for 20 years. So if you want to have results in 2 years' time for the next election and have a different results in 2 years further on, then it's not going to happen. Then it's not going to be sustainable. So I think we need to set up some sort of a structure that enables this to be a sustainable model that can be repeated and rolled out, and that there's one single inclusive vision that we can pursue. Failing that, we may chop and change, and that will lead to disarray. It will lead to lender and donor disillusionment, and it will lead to a series of failed projects, essentially. So this is what we don't want. And I think, therefore, that making sure that we can avoid what happened in the north of England, where the coal pits were shut down without any sort of social plan, and those towns 20 years after the fact still haven't recovered. We have to plan now for that long-term sustainability and long-term implementation. Otherwise, we will come to grief. There's no doubt about that.
Thank you. Thank you. I am wondering, we've got just under half an hour left. I think at this point, let's ask the audience if there is anybody who's got questions or comments. Okay.
Joanna, I thought that I could add a couple of points to this very important question that you asked, Andre, on the sustainability, but I can come later.
Okay. All right. We'll give you another opportunity before we close, MF. Yeah. I think, oh, no, hang on. We'll take you afterwards. I think whoever has the microphone has the.
Hi, Andre.
Yeah.
I've looked at Eskom's website, and it says Komati used to employ 500 people. Could you give an indication of how many people you expect to be hired once the solar farm is complete? How many local South Africans will there be working on that solar farm?
Okay, let's take another 1 or 2 questions, and then the panel will answer them.
My name is Walton Pantland, and I'm from a global trade union called Industrial. And NUMSA, NUM, and UASA, the 3 South African unions most implicated in Komati, are affiliated to us. So obviously we're watching this very, very closely, because we also have affiliated unions in Indonesia, in India, in many other countries, which might be experiencing JETP in the future. And I have to say, we very, very much want this to work. We think this is a really important model. We have to get it right in South Africa, because if we get it right in South Africa, it's going to become the model which is rolled out in other countries as well. And of course, this one, Your Baby Komati, is the first example. So all eyes on South Africa to get this one right. And yeah, I mean, as you said, Falto, renewable energy is much more gender inclusive. There are lots of really, really good reasons for this. You said 7,700 jobs are going to be created. That's also really good. I know that our unions have concerns about JETP as a whole, and that's particularly the finance issue. I'm sure that you're aware of that as well. One of the things we're lobbying very hard for is climate finance, so that programs like this are funded by grants rather than by loans. And then we also have some concerns about the just transition process. So Dr. Khumalo, I'm really glad to hear that you spoke about consultation with communities, but there is an ILO definition of just transition, and it's in the Paris rulebook, and it says social dialogue, and it means between unions, government, and the company involved. So general consultation is not social dialogue. Social dialogue is co-determination. And we have structures in South Africa like NEDLAC for that. So for us, it's really important that we bring the unions on board. I understand their concerns. I also understand where you're coming from, but I think, yeah, really important opportunity for us. And I was a bit concerned that only the World Bank actually mentioned unions, and Marinelli, Ms. Marinelli, I'm glad you mentioned them twice, but I'd actually like to know from you, what are the unions saying?
Thank you. Okay, let's see. Let's take another third question. Yeah, and can you introduce yourself? And sorry, we'll come back to you to introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Diana. I'm from the Georgetown delegation. I'm
From
curious.
which delegation?
The Georgetown delegation, yes.
Okay.
I'm curious. Andre was mentioning that we need a framework that can sustain political changes and all that, like throughout time. But I'm curious if there's any other, in terms of policy cohesion, if there are any other things that you have in mind that you think are also necessary, not just that time frame.
Okay, I don't see any other hands. I think we'll start with you, Andre, and come across the panel. We'll come to you at the end, MF, if that's okay.
Thanks. So I think let's first, to answer your question, imagine the do nothing scenario. In the do nothing scenario, all 500 people lose their jobs, the contractors lose their jobs, we shut down the plant, and it's over and done with. So that's the scenario that we're trying to protect against. And that's why the 7,700 jobs came about. Some of it will be during the construction phase. Some of it will not be right adjacent to the plant. Some of it will be moved to other Eskom plants. But we've already assured all of the workers at the plant that not one Eskom employee will lose his or her job. So there's job security there. Now, the reason why we can be so generous is that we've got a skill shortage in South Africa. So skilled, trained individuals will always be in high demand. And I'm therefore very, very reassured, very comforted by the studies that have shown, and we've had 3 different independent studies that have shown that after accounting for job losses in the coal sector, which there will be, let's not be naive about it, there will be job losses. There will be a net 300,000 new jobs that will be created. So this is very important. And if I can segue from that answer to your question, I think what is also very important is to have integrated, mutually consistent policies. So in order to create those jobs, you need industrial policy that encourages investment in renewable energy component manufacturers. So let's create a special economic zone in the towns right in the heart of the coal belt to attract investment, to attract workers to be employed in those factories. You need an environmental policy. You need a fiscal policy. You need an energy policy. So all of these policies need to coalesce around one single objective. And then I think, if I may say, and I'm veering into some dangerous territory here, the policy needs to be consistent and it needs to be maintained. It cannot change every political cycle. It's got to be maintained as a national vision. In terms of speaking on behalf of the unions, I cannot speak on behalf of the unions. And we have been endeavoring to engage with the unions through a number of high-level engagements. We've had engagements at plant level, repeated engagements where inter alia, we were able to demonstrate that there would be no job losses for Eskom employees. I think the concerns that organized labor have are very legitimate, and I think we shouldn't disregard them. But I also think that we should not be constrained by the interests of people who currently have a very coal-linked job. We need to look at what the alternative is, and then with the support of entities like GEAP, create the opportunity for those individuals in good time, before job losses become a reality, to reskill and upskill themselves so that they can be positioned as credible recruits to the new industries that we want to create. So I think, again, see this as a process of engagement to create better futures and better outcomes.
Okay, Thuli, when you respond, can you maybe also talk about the worker input and the labor input into the PCC?
Yes, thank you, Joanne. I just wanted to start by saying that conversation between government, business, and the unions is happening. But the PCC, maybe just to take a step back, in South Africa, there's a huge amount of people that are not organized labor, that are not going to be represented by unions in this conversation. And that is why the PCC includes NGOs, community-based groups, to bring the voices of those people into the organization. And also, you know, the symbiotic nature with which business operates. Eskom could be having a discussion with their employees, but that business affects a whole lot of other businesses. And what the PCC does is it brings all the partners into the room to discuss these issues that go beyond this one particular industry that is dealing with a particular matter. And it is, I think, a very good model. Of course, not perfect, but when you look, and if you and let me say, the meetings of the PCC are live streamed. We're going to have a meeting on the 2nd of December. You can watch that meeting from anywhere in the world. That's transparency. The discussions are held in the room. You can hear labor speak. You can hear business speak. You can hear everybody in the room making their mark in the conversation. And we really believe that it's given us a model that, you know, we can be confident that we are consulting. And also the other thing that we do when we do go to communities, I don't know if you know that South Africa has 11 official languages. We make sure that there's interpretation in the meeting, because not everybody is an English speaker, but we get the predominant local language and people interpreting to the people to ensure that they are part of the conversation. I may not answer your question specifically, but that's the model that we've taken in South Africa to answer the question.
Going on. Okay, guys, I think can we give it a minute before we try? Okay, I think the noise is going. Okay. All right. I've got I'm going to give over to Leon. Can you shout? You're very soft spoken. You're going to have to yell.
I can yell, actually, but I haven't been doing it. Trying to be a little more professional.
Holds it right by-
Okay. So I guess I wanted to follow up on the point about what's needed. And I'm taking a little bit at a broader perspective, but it gets, I think, very much at the points Andro is making about industrial development more generally. And I think that's a critical issue. I was very struck by the number on the slide that said 46% of South. For those who are not here and listening online, there's a great deal of activity outside. That 46% of I believe of exports were at risk due to potential carbon tariffs. I should keep going, correct?
I'm trying to get someone to go and ask them to turn it down a bit.
So that links up to a broader issue that I think we're very interested in at the Bezos Earth Fund, both in GEAP, but also going beyond it. And that is about strengthening capacity in countries and developing countries around the world as much as we can, not just for the short game, but for the long game. And what we're talking about here, not just about workforce development, but about the capacities to be looking at some of these hard questions. How do you think about, in Comarty, we're thinking about going to renewables, but are there other industrial development strategies that would make sense? What do you think about hydrogen in terms of hydrogen development? What do you think about making up for all of these lost exports in a changing world? That's something that can actually be helped by domestic capacity and think tanks, universities, and others linked up to the policy processes, people in the policy space going back and forth. So we're interested in building up that capacity and investing in that capacity. So that doesn't answer specifically about how do we replicate the power plant solution in Comarty to other power plants. It's about a much broader question about economic development and how do you engage in economic development. And there's a really clear role, and has been a very clear role for philanthropy for some time to fund institutions to support that. I just look back at the US. We passed our single biggest piece of climate legislation, and 2 points about it. First is it's called the Inflation Reduction Act. It doesn't mention climate. It's really an industrial development policy in many ways. And then second, that's a long process with large investments from philanthropy over time into NGOs, universities who are constantly engaging back and forth with the government to help in this space. And also people going into government and coming out. So anyways, just want to put on the table that from our perspective, there's a real value in doing that and building the capacity in the developing countries, not in global North NGOs or global North universities, but actually in the global South.
Thank you. MF, can I hand over to you? I'm sure you've gathered that this is a very noisy environment this morning, so you're going to have to talk quite loud to be heard. And then just to say, I've got some questions from the audience. Most of them, I think, are factual questions for Andre, but we'll come over to them just before we close. So MF, over to you.
Okay, thank you very much again. Actually, we hear you very well. We don't have the background noise, so in some sense, it's good to be online. So I just want to reassure you. Do you hear me well, or should I speak a bit louder?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay.
Yeah, that's great.
Okay, so I would like actually to make 3 points. So the first one is in addressing the question raised by the global representative of labor. I think that truly introduced the question very well. I think that the strength of South Africa, what we have observed, is that there is a platform that has been established so that, it's not for the financiers to come and engage with such and such person. And I was early August, I joined a session organized by the PCC in the series of consultation that they have at the eMalahleni, I hope that I pronounced that well, city, where we had indeed a private sector, the representative of the labor, the provincial government was represented, and also the municipality. And I think that is the essence of it, bringing everybody. Obviously, you asked me what they are saying. What I heard, of course, first, the concern that they want to be part of the solution. They were very clear about that, to say, well, it cannot be done without us. And I think it's a fair statement. So it's a message for all the policymakers to ensure that this happens. But what I see is that it is happening, particularly under the leadership of this very nice platform, that has been created with the Presidential Climate Commission. I also could observe that there were some concern on their part on renewable. And it does make sense because they have operated for so many years in a coal environment. So they were asking, how do you know that it can work? And I think that this is where the South-South experience can help. For example, before being in charge of Southern Africa, I was in charge of North Africa. And you probably know the Warzazat project where they said our gold, the desert has been transformed into gold, where now they have high capacity of solar. So, and maybe, in terms of South-South tools, we could envisage, this sharing of experience. I found that is very useful. And in most of the consultations that I have had, I also invite, the labor union to participate. The second point link that you had asked, Joanne, to Andre in terms of the sustainability. So first of all, and building on the communication, in this committee, what we have observed is that the stakeholder platform that has been put in place engages also the communities, the private sector in the region. And I think that that is very important because it has to be the project of everybody, not the project of Eskom. So ensuring that you have this articulation is very important. And I think that leads me to my second very important point is that as the representative of GIAT mentioned, clearly this will affect significantly the economy of Mpumalanga. And we are pleased to see that the government, the Premier in particular, reach out to a number of stakeholders, and we are trying actually to come together again through the leadership of the PCC so that we don't have piecemeal approaches. First of all, to do an institutional review of their framework. They have created a Green Cluster Agency. They are trying to take the lead, and that makes sense because I don't think that we expect Eskom over time to be fully in charge of the agenda, which is beyond actually producing, electricity. So it is clear that the provincial government needs to step up. But I think that what is very important is that they are now looking at what is the future, what is Mpumalanga without coal. So thinking of a regional integrated development plan, and this is where bringing, the think tank, the academia to do this work will be very useful. And we know that thankfully, this capacity exists in South Africa and has contributed significantly to the CCDR, the climate report that links development and climate and shows the imperative of doing that, if any, in terms of the industrial reconfiguration. So we are pleased to see this development. And we do ensure, Joanne, that we are not dealing with individual, but the idea of using the South African institution to support that is where the sustainability will come from. Finally, I think that there was a question on grants or non-grants. So let me first indicate that the financing package that has been provided for Komati is really blended, and as mentioned by the colleague of GHAB, the grant component and also the Canadian allocation is really very concessional. So that makes it affordable if we look at the benefits coming from that, as I mentioned in my earlier introduction. But with the climate investment facility and the $500 million that have been announced, what is interesting is that, first of all, there is $100 million dedicated to exactly the community development project. So a recognition that it will require resources, and out of that $100 million, $25 million is in grants. So it's not insignificant. And by the way, the decommissioning part, which is $350 million, has also a grant, full grant of $20 million, in addition to the fact that the terms themselves are also comparable to those of the the Canadian facility. So I think that in summary, I think that, as Tuli had said, the name of the game is partnership. And let me use this opportunity to mention to you that actually, even the World Bank, we are trying to organize ourselves. The president has announced this facility, the scale facility, so that again, the trust funds that are dedicating, that can help leverage and reduce the costs are under a unique umbrella. You will hear more about that, but also on our side, we are trying to organize ourselves to facilitate this integration, and the importance of giving, much space to the provincial government to guide, the transformation of the economy of Mpumalanga. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, MF. And just, I want to just deal very quickly before we close. The KfW funding is a grant. Yes, so there was a question online around that. I think that we talked about the Eskom decommissioning schedule. There's a question around what other power stations will be included. I think it's the ones that are set out in the IRP to be decommissioned. And then a question about whether the people who can be upskilled include people from the coal mining sector. And I'm presuming that, yes, it does. So I think that addresses. So Andre, you want to make a closing comment? I'm under pressure to close the panel. I'm going to give you the last word, and then I'm going to close up. Thanks.
Right, thanks for those questions, and you've answered them well and very succinctly. But if I can just give a shout out to Mandy Rambaros, who is actually Ms. Kumati, and who put together the concept around Kumati, implemented all of this. She has now left Eskom, but I think let's give her a round. Thank you.
Yeah, so great that you're here, Mandy. We saw you at the beginning and mentioned the role that you played, but then you vanished. We're glad you're back. So thank you, everybody. You know, I'm going to hand over very briefly in fact, I'm going to hand over to Mr. Makwana, the chair of the Eskom board, to close down. But before I do, I just want to say, I think this has been a fabulous discussion. I think that, you know, being able, you know, it is impossible until it is done is a great way to think about this. But I also think it is about will and intentionality and a willingness to work and to work together. And I think that above all in this conversation, I think that we've seen that those ingredients are in this process in abundance. And I think certainly that gives me hope and makes me feel really optimistic that we can, if we move forward together, we're going to move. Thank you. Thank you.
I hope that I have a loud enough rally voice, given that we are now competing with other activities around us. So, ladies and gentlemen, we just want to say thank you very much for joining us this morning, and also join you for those of you at least who managed to slip in a word or two in terms of your participation. Just a few closing remarks. I have 5 minutes, so I'll try and do it in less. I'm certain you all have other sessions, I'm sure, that you have to rush to. The purposing and repowering of Komati for us, firstly, is an important flagship for our country. It's an important flagship also that is a first in the world to repurpose a coal power station into a renewable energy power station, contributing towards cleaner energy within our base load. As you've heard so many times throughout this panel, we need multiple key stakeholder commitments, ongoing engagements and support, constant engagement with host communities, SMMEs, organized labor, local business, provincial, local and national government is key for the success of what we've started. In fact, it's a priceless pillar that will ensure that we achieve ongoing success as we embark on this journey of repowering and repurposing program within the Eskom Just Energy Transition. As Eskom, in this regard, we are on a quest that is twofold. Firstly, in that we, on a day-to-day, perhaps even hourly to hourly, we're concerned about restoring healthy energy availability factor, ameliorating load shedding, while we simultaneously achieve our fair share, which is 40% or so of South Africa's JET program. Our Eskom JET commenced with Komati, as if you heard this morning. The next power stations will be Camden, and as you see on the screen, Grootvlei, Hendrina, and all our other power stations that are officially designated for decommissioning. We do what we do, serving our primary market, but also mindful of the fact that whilst our primary beneficiaries are the people of South Africa itself is a gateway to 250 million or so people in Southern Africa. So our success will also have a positive impact on our neighbors, and therefore a collective achievement of sustainable EAF and ensuring that as we achieve our fair share of the jet, that we also indirectly also contribute to our neighbors' journeys in terms of their own fair shares. It is important that we appreciate what we heard this morning, that skills development, reskilling is going to be an important catalyst in achieving the sustainability of these JET programs, to ensure that, as you can tell, we're talking about multiple decades ahead. So generation to generation of Eskom employees and communities are going to need to be trained and reskilled and upskilled. So as we thank you, we wish to say, I had someone saying they're quoting a saying that they can't cite a source. I also have a quotation that I've heard and used many times before. It says that none of us is better than all of us. And as Eskom, we would wish to say, as we thank you for being here this morning, it is very clear to us that there's a few impacts that will be achieved. Firstly, there will be a modest GDP impact, which will go a long way towards contributing to South Africa's economic recovery. Secondly, there will be a positive impact on jobs directly and indirectly. There will be a significant impact on reduction of CO2 emissions. We will continue to be an enabler and catalyst for growth and development for the country and the region. We will continue to facilitate positive impact on community well-being, as has been said, when you have grown up and lived in the heartland of Mpumalanga with all the coal impact. Certainly this would be a much welcome reprieve towards a new, cleaner form of energy in the community. We will certainly cherish positive partnerships around what we've launched. The noise is getting worse. What we've launched, some of my colleagues call it a self-healing power station. I call it a power station in a container. Again, a first in the world. You may have heard a few days ago from Andre that for a modest amount of $100,000, you are able to power 40 to 50 homes with this small micro power station. And certainly the people of Vicksburg, who have benefited from our initial pilot of this on a microgrid basis, would attest to the fact that they haven't experienced load shedding for a long time. And therefore, to the extent that we can partner with many other key players in the various areas of South Africa, rural, urban South Africa, we can certainly go a long way to ensure that we achieve what Joanne mentioned earlier as Komati on steroids, that we go a long way to ensuring that load shedding becomes ameliorated or minimized for especially those communities where, the smallest amount of electricity makes a huge difference to the SMME that has to support basic livelihoods in a township and in a rural community. So with that, we wish to say to all of you, thank you for your participation. Thank you for your attention. Thank you.